What's up YouTube, Capital G here, talking about skill cards in this video, and man, Konami is not messing around, guys. Looks like they are already rolling out some of the broken skill cards, despite the fact that these were only revealed like 3 weeks ago. If you guys remember, I talked about my skill card, and with this new Pegasus one, literally the second skill card revealed is already broken in my opinion. So this is just absolutely nuts. Konami's not playing around when it comes to these speed duels, but what exactly am I talking about for those of you guys who didn't watch my other video where I first talked about these speed duels and the new skill cards that were coming to them? So essentially what speed duels are, I guess to give you the quickest explanation, is basically it's kind of like Duel Links but in real life. This is something Konami is going to be promoting and actually pushing early next year. They're going to be releasing these character decks, you know, one for like Joey and Mai and Pegasus and, you know, Seto, Kaiba, Yugi, basically all the prominent characters from DM and the characters that people like from Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links. They're basically releasing physical cards for this this new format that they're creating, and I'm sure it's going to have its own ban list. It'll be, you know, somewhat similar to Duel Links, but actually a physical version of the game. And in this speed duel format, well, in the speed duel game, I guess, Konami has introduced a new mechanic called the skill cards. And what these skill cards are, I'm still not 100% sure where exactly you activate them, if you activate them in the spell and trap zone, or if you activate them, you know, in the graveyard or what, but essentially they've given us a new mechanic for this type of dueling, for this format. Now, will this ever come to competitive? I'll talk about that in a little bit, but you can see right here, this is my Valentine, and this is her skill card, and these skill cards can be activated at the beginning of the duel, and they have some nice little utility effects, or at least I'm basing that off of my skill card. My skill card is called Tribal Energy. It revolves around you playing Harpies and Amazonas in the same deck, which doesn't really sound like a good time. I'm not sure why anyone would play those two archetypes together, because they don't really have any like similarities. I mean, I guess they were both played by Mai in the anime, but that's pretty much where their synergy kind of stops. But yeah, this card lets you draw 1 to 2 cards based on, you know, the amount of Amazonas and the amount of Harpies that you have in your hand or that you have on the field at the same time. So when I looked at the first skill card, I was like, okay, if this is the power level of these cards and they're all going to be fairly situational, they're not going to be, you know, ridiculously game breaking. It's not going to be something where you can activate one and just literally win the duel off of it. All right, I think that this is kind of cool, and, you know, I'll definitely keep an eye on this format. And I actually thought, and I talked about how I thought this could be really cool if maybe they did something like this for Era 7 of Yu-Gi-Oh! Because, you know, when the Reigns era ends, Konami probably is going to promote a new mechanic, but I said that maybe we probably didn't need another summoning mechanic because, you know, the last 4 eras straight, we've gotten summoning mechanic, etc., and they've gotten more complicated and convoluted, and Yu-Gi-Oh's already a difficult game enough to learn, you know, for new beginners, for players who have never played the game. It's fucking hard to learn how to play Yu-Gi-Oh! So I was like, why don't they just do something simple, add these skill cards into the game? You can make a bunch of them based on the characters from the anime, from, you know, the 6 Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime shows and the manga. You can even have characters who are in the manga but don't appear in the anime. Basically, I thought that the possibilities were endless, and I thought it'd be a nice way of enhancing Yu-Gi-Oh! Without making the game that much more complicated, because really they kind of just remind me very much of like field spells, except they're kind of field spells that you wouldn't actually have to draw or run in your main deck. So again, not really that complicated. And then I read this this new Pegasus skill card, and I was like, what the fuck is Konami doing? I don't understand why they would think that this would be a good card in any Yu-Gi-Oh! Format. I understand that speed duels are going to be drastically different than competitive, probably a lot slower, but man, this card is just utterly ridiculous. So if you guys remember Pegasus from the original Yu-Gi-Oh! DM, and really like the Duelist Kingdom arc, you know, he had the Millennium Eye and he could see like Yugi's hand, and it basically allowed him to cheat with his duels. Well, someone in Konami R&D was like, yeah, why don't we just build that into a card? That'll be pretty fair, right? Let me read you this card, his skill card. Well, his first, he actually has 2 skill cards. His first skill card is called Millennium Eye, and my goodness, like, I don't know how they're going to start with their ban list, but I could see this easily being like the first banned skill card. So It's called Millennium Eye. It's a Pegasus skill card. It says, at the start of the duel, look at your opponent's opening hand, which that's already fucking broken. Your opening hand is supposed to be fairly sacred. It says you can choose to have that player shuffle their hand into their deck and draw a new hand. If both players use a skill at the same time, the turn player resolves their skill first. So basically, it's a forced mulligan for your opponent, but at the same time, you do not actually have to force your opponent to draw a new hand. You can just look at their hand and you can just take all that information. And at first, I don't know why, I was thinking about this from just a numerical standpoint, from like card advantage. I was like, it's really okay. It's kind of okay. Then I think it just hit me at one point, like maybe a minute later. I was like, this is the dumbest card that they could ever create for any type of format. You think about like historically cards that let you see your opponent's entire like hand and then interact with them. When I think of cards of that description, I generally think of cards like the Forceful Sentry, Confiscation, Trap Dust Shoot. You know, cards that are fucking banned and have been banned for like a decade. Why would you ever want to create a card that at the beginning of the duel, this costs you no advantage, by the way, so you don't have to draw this card or you don't have to expend any resources to do this. You just activate your skill, you get to see your opponent's entire opening hand, so you know how to play around everything that they're going to do. And then if their hand's a little too good, maybe they have a counter for what you're trying to do, just go ahead and shuffle that hand back, bro. You know what I mean? Like, that just seems utterly ridiculous. And then I just started going down the rabbit hole. I started actually thinking about this in the competitive sense. And could you imagine if this card actually came to competitive Yu-Gi-Oh? Like, you think Goki are good now? Goki are winning YCS now? Like, this would make a Goki deck absolutely tier 0. Imagine if you're going first, right? You're playing a combo deck, you're playing Dark Goki or Goki, you're playing the Dark Warrior deck, maybe the Danger Dark World FTK, and you go ahead and you just look at your opponent's hand and you're like, oh man, they got a couple of hand traps I don't want to play around. Oh, wait. I'm gonna go ahead and make you shuffle your hand back into your deck. Now you don't have that Drone Lockbird to stop me. Now you don't have that Ash Blossom and that Impermanence. You don't have that Winter Cherries, or it could even be something as simple as you see something like you're playing Goki and you see the Winged Dragon Spirit mode in your opponent's hand. You're like, oh man, I gotta make them shuffle that back into their deck. Good thing I dodged that bullet. I could have made my extra link board. They end up Winged Dragon Spirit moding me and I lose everything, or I lose everything to an evenly matched ×2 or an evenly matched plus Regeki or something like that. I don't understand, because it's really interesting. Konami has spent so much time, in my opinion, making sure that seeing your opponent's hand is something that's kind of sacred. If you guys don't know, a lot of the cards that I named, Trap Dust Shoot, Confiscation, Forceful Sentry, those are all like DM cards, and they're all on the ban list. But Konami historically hasn't released any type of cards like that. Like, Konami does not release a lot of cards that let you see your opponent's entire hand, let alone have any type of interaction with it. Even the cards like Trickstar Reincarnation, these are cards that, yeah, they do kind of disrupt your opponent, but at the same time, they don't let you see what your opponent actually has in their hand and then decide if you want to disrupt them at that point. You just have to just go all in when you activate the Reincarnation. So it's really weird that they would kind of create another card that I would say just on merit alone is fairly degenerate, and they would actually make that a card that you don't have to expend any type of resources and then be able to use it at the beginning of the duel, let alone. I mean, a lot of times, if you know what your opponent has and you can play around it, you should have an overwhelming advantage in the duel, especially if your opponent has like a reactive card, like, this My Valentine card. If they actually have the conditions to meet this, you can completely disrupt them, make them shuffle, make them get a new hand, and maybe they don't have the conditions to meet their skill card. So I looked at this and I was like, man, I really hope that this is not going to be the legit power level of most of these cards, because if it is, I think that that's going to be really unhealthy for speed duels. And I actually thought about this in previous formats. I was like, okay, well, it's going to be slower, so how would this play out in like GOAT format? How would this play out in GX? And honestly, I'm not sure that there's any time in Yu-Gi-Oh where you wouldn't want to be able to see your opponent's entire opening hand and then decide if you want to just go ahead and make them shuffle it back into the deck. Because even if your opponent even if you're playing in a format where it's like super grindy, like GOAT formats, just knowing all of your opponent's cards, having all that information is invaluable. Now, Pegasus does have a second card that relates to Toon World, and I think that this one is like, this is kind of more what I expected. So it's called It's a Toon World. It's a Pegasus skill continuous spell, and it says says this card is treated as Toon World. And this is something that's like way more balanced. Basically, at the start of the duel, you place this card in the center of your spell and trap zone, and then you flip it over. So at the start of the duel, you basically just get a free Toon World on the field. And honestly, you know, an archetype like Toons, they need something like this. Toon Kingdom is definitely a good card, but sometimes you don't always get to it. So having a free Toon World on the field at the beginning of the duel, not really like OP in my opinion, even though that is kind of like a +1 and it's what Toons basically need to actually like play Yu-Gi-Oh! This doesn't really seem like you just win by activating it. But that Millennium Eye card on the other hand, man, I honestly think that in the hands of a skilled player, you could probably just win off of this. No matter what type of Yu-Gi-Oh! You're playing, information is always just invaluable in knowing how to play around all of your opponent's cards, because you know what they have, and if they do have a hand that you think that you can't beat, well then just make them get a new hand and it'll probably be something that it won't be unbeatable. I'm not exactly sure why again they made this. I kind of feel like if they do end up, you know, having this be successful and it does end up having like a ban list, I kind of feel like this will be a card that is on it. And if this ever came to competitive, if they did start releasing skill cards for real life Yu-Gi-Oh, this would be a card that probably got banned after like one format. Let's keep it 100. No one would want this in the game, especially considering that you don't have to expend any real resources. I think a balanced version of this would have been to look at 2 cards randomly in your opponent's hand and then decide if they can shuffle, or then decide if you want to shuffle those back and have them draw 2 more cards. Like, that would have been fine, but to see your opponent's entire hand, like, nah, you definitely can't have that. But whatever you guys think, leave it in the comment section below. Does this change your opinion on skill cards and maybe the potential of them coming to competitive? The fact that just with the second skill card revealed, I think that we already have a broken one. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already. Turn on that notification bell for daily videos and check out these other videos I know you'll enjoy.